Welcome back to the Aubergine Chef. Now today we'll be making another Filipino dessert called conchita, and conchita is Filipino steamed rice cake. Now this one is different from puto, the one we made last week, in that it's dense, chewy, and sticky a little bit. It's a little bit less of a crowd pleaser in terms of everyone liking it. It's more of an acquired taste. Mostly the texture thing is kind of weird to people. But it's still a fun, interesting dessert that is easy to make. Just like puto, we steam it, so it's very easy to make. But it does have a few odd ingredients that I'm going to go over before we start measuring everything out. Okay, the first ingredient that's a little bit, maybe a little bit unfamiliar to you is rice flour. Now it seems like it's just should be pretty straightforward, but there are two kinds of rice flour. There's the white rice flour, and then there's glutinous rice flour, also known as sticky rice flour, or sweet rice flour, or short grain rice flour. You don't want to use the glutinous or the sticky rice flour or the sweet rice flour. You want to use plain, regular white rice flour. And that's because if you try to use the glutinous rice flour, what's going to end up happening is that your conchita won't set up, and it'll be mushy, and it will just be this big pile, this big lump. You can still eat it, but it's not the way it's supposed to look. It's supposed to be able to hold its shape kind of like a really dense jello. You can find rice flour in most Asian markets, Filipino markets, and if you get it from an Asian market, you can save a lot of money. I got my bag of rice flour, 16 ounces for 89 cents. The same bag of rice flour at a local grocery store, regular chain grocery store, $5. So do yourself a favor and go to the Asian market and save a couple bucks. The next ingredient that's a little odd, and I wish I kept the packaging, I threw it away already, it's called annatto powder. And annatto is commonly used in Latin American and Spanish desserts, Caribbean too. And it's mostly used for coloring. It gives all your food a bright orange color, kind of like how saffron gives everything a kind of orangish color. This is a little bit more concentrated when it comes in terms of color, though. It does have a little bit of a flavor. It's a nutty, earthy, peppery, sweet flavor. It's hard to describe. It's very mild, though, so don't expect a huge amount of flavor. And if you do use a lot, it kind of gets an almost overwhelming flavor that's kind of like not good. So you don't really want to use more than what the recipe calls for. It's easy to find in Latin American restaurants, or Latin American stores and markets, and as well as Filipino stores. The last ingredient we're going to be using is reduced baking soda. Now, normally conchita uses an ingredient called lye, and lye is well, it's supposed to be safe, but it can be dangerous. Lye is used in pretzel making, bagels, olives, curing olives, fish, Nordic fish, and as well as making Asian foods like noodles. And lye is also used in making soap, biodiesel fuel. It's an ingredient in drain cleaner, an oven cleaner. So it's a very corrosive alkali. It can burn your skin, it can burn the inside of your esophagus and your stomach. Now if you cook it properly and you handle it properly, it's safe to eat. But and it's regulated by the FDA, so it's not like you'll be able to find an incredibly powerful form of lye that is not meant for eating if you look at a food market. It's purported to be regulated by the FDA. But there's plenty of recipes out there that use lye for conchita, and so I decided to look for an alternative that would be a little bit safer. And so that's when I looked up an article on the New York Times that says that if you bake baking powder or baking soda in the oven, you can reduce it and make it a stronger alkali, and then you can use it in foods that require lye. And so what you do is you just take a sheet pan that has been lined with aluminum foil, and you bake a thin layer of baking powder. I baked mine at 300 degrees for about 90 minutes. The article says 60, but I went ahead and pushed it for the next extra 30 minutes. And then what happens is a lot of the water gets evaporated that might be still in the baking powder or baking soda, and it also, I don't want to say chemically changes, because I'm not exactly sure of the entire process. The article describes it very well in depth. But basically what happens is it makes it a stronger alkali similar to lye. but not to the strength that lye is. Also, this is easy to find. Baking soda is everywhere to find, and you can find it in your grocery store, and it's very easy to make. Just be careful because in its reduced form, it's a little bit more susceptible to water in the air, so you want to make sure you put it in a glass jar. And you can also, it might irritate your skin a little bit too, so be careful about that. And baking, let's see. Oh, and make sure that you use a fresh box of baking soda. Don't use that stuff that's been sitting in your refrigerator to keep it fresh or keep your cabinet fresh. You want to make sure you use the freshest box you can that's not been opened yet. I just think it works better that way. So anyway, now that I've gone over some of the more unknown ingredients, why don't we go ahead and start weighing everything out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make the half recipe, but I'm going to give you the full batch, which makes about 40 pieces. My half batch will make about 20 pieces. I'll give you the full batch amounts, but I'm going to go ahead and weigh out the half batch amounts. So I need 8 3/4 ounces of white rice flour. Okay, we're going to switch our scale over to metric. We need 5 grams of annatto powder. We also need 5 grams of the reduced baking soda we've made. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let that sift through. Okay, we're going to switch back to the US standard, and we're going to need 2 3/4 ounces of all-purpose flour. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let that sift through. Okay, we need 7 ounces of brown sugar. And 3 ounces of granulated sugar. This is optional. If you want a less sweet product, just leave the granulated sugar completely out. Okay, once you have all your dry ingredients together, go ahead and whisk it. Remember, you want your steamer going, so that way you'll have your water boiling by the time you're finished with making the batter and filling the cups. Okay, now you need 1 pound, 6 ounces of water. Remember, I'm doing a half batch, that's why I'm able to put it in such a small cup. And you need 4 ounces of evaporated milk. Now, I added this into the recipe. I find that adding milk into a recipe helps give it a more appetizing color. This is completely optional. Just make sure that if you do leave it out, that you add 2 ounces of water to the full batch and 1 ounce of water to the half batch if you decide not to have milk. And if you want to use heavy cream or whole milk or soy milk or whatever, you could probably get away with it since it's just for color purposes. But I wouldn't use anything like buttermilk, for example. Okay, go ahead and add your liquid ingredients to your dry ingredients while whisking. And go ahead and whisk it until there's no more lumps. Okay, now that you have your conchita batter finished, why don't you go ahead and pour it into the silicone molds, almost all the way to the top, depending on how tall you want it. These will rise in the steamer, probably, maybe, not always, but they will sink once they cool off. So they'll basically be about the same shape and size as you pour into the molds. So if you want smaller pieces of conchita, feel free to pour only about halfway. Okay, so it looks like my math is a little bit off. This makes closer to 12 full-size pieces, but if you have the amount in each of the cups, you could get about 24. I'll go ahead and make the adjustment on the recipe that you guys can download. The half batch makes 12, the large batch, or the full batch makes 24. Okay, then go ahead and arrange these in your steamer. Remember, you do this off the stove so that way you don't burn yourself. You don't want to put it right up against the edge of the steamer pan either because you don't want any condensation rolling into your conchita batter. You got 2 tiers, put about 6 per tier. Otherwise, you can put about 10 pieces per tier, at least in mine. And then after you have all of your pieces together, we're going to go ahead and put this on the steamer. Remember that if you want to boil your water on high, that's fine, but you don't have to have it on high the whole time. You can reduce it down to probably about half as much, as long as there's still steam going up to the top. And remember that since we're steaming this, we're going to be steaming this for an hour. So I guess you didn't remember that because you didn't know to begin with, but we'll be steaming it for an hour. So try to keep a kettle of hot water on the side so that way you can refill your steamer if you don't have a huge steamer or if your steamer doesn't hold a lot of water. Or just fill it with a lot of water if you have a bigger one. Let's go ahead and bring this over to the steamer. Okay, put it right on top of your boiling water. And you're good to go. Go ahead and cook it for about an hour. Okay, so it's been an hour. Remember to open the steamer away from you to prevent burning yourself. As you can see, the conchita puffed up, but as soon as they take it off the steamer, it'll sink. Okay, check if any of the conchita has water in it from the steamer. Be really careful. This is very hot water, but you need to dump it out. Okay, when you dump it out, go ahead and let it cool. Just take it out of here. You can put it on a wire cooling rack, though it doesn't really matter. And just go ahead and let them cool all the way to room temperature. Okay, once your conchita has cooled down to room temperature, it's easy to peel. It's easy to take out because it'll pop right out of the mold just like that. It'll hold its shape and everything. Now, if you use the wrong rice flour, if you use sweet rice flour or short grain rice flour, it won't come out in a whole shape. It'll just be a shapeless lob or lump or blob. So, if you're having issues taking it out, consider using a different kind of rice flour. Okay, and if your molds have a little bit of residue on it, then go ahead and let them soak for a couple hours in hot soapy water, and the whatever is inside will come off much more easier than if you just sat there and scrubbed it. And conchita is usually served with fresh coconut. I don't have fresh coconut, but I do have the grated coconut. Okay, so that's how you make Kutsinta Filipino steamed rice cake. Now, if you want to store this for some time, it's best to refrigerate them. You can let them sit out at room temperature overnight and all that kind of jazz. It doesn't need to be refrigerated. But I feel like they stay fresher and they taste better if you refrigerate them. And other websites and other forums believe that Kutsinta is highly perishable at room temperature. Though I don't really believe it because a lot of Filipino stores and markets sell them packaged but sitting outside of a refrigerator case. So it's just best to go ahead and refrigerate it. And remember that it's served really great with coconut. It's almost expected to be served with coconut, actually, so it tastes a lot better with coconut. And remember, the Aubergine chef, demystifying dessert, one recipe at a time.